I thought my recruiting operations were just running like a dream. And then I tried these 5 experiments and it completely changed how we were using our ATS and improved things tremendously. I'm going to walk you through these 5 experiments and what you can do to get the most out of your ATS. Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Salesforce for Recruiters. I'm your host, Brad Owens, and I was just like you. I spent well over a decade using various pieces of technology that never really fit what I wish they could do for me and my firm. And then I saw Salesforce, and I went, where has this been all my life? And since then, I've dedicated my career to helping the recruiting industry understand how Salesforce can help solve their pain points and be the platform for them into the future. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about the 5 experiments that I ran that helped me understand the big gaps that were in my ATS and how I was able to solve them with Salesforce. So we're going to talk through those on today's episode. So for the very first experiment I ran, I want to talk about a very specific meeting. Our sales team would go out, they'd win a new job for our recruiting team to work on, they'd send along a Slack message, that ping would pop up, and then chaos would ensue. So I sat in on a number of those different sales handoff meetings to the recruiting and sourcing team to understand what are our gaps? What are the recruiting and sourcing team asking of the salesperson? What has that salesperson collected throughout that process? And what do they not have for the recruiting team? And where could we make improvements in that actual process? That process used to cost us a tremendous amount of time. We're talking 2 hours-ish in handoff meetings per day that we could potentially clear off of our recruiting team's calendar if we were able to solve that. So what we discovered was inside of Salesforce, when these salespeople were going and winning these new opportunities that we were tracking them as, so they won the opportunity to work on this job, and then they were not taking that and moving that directly over to a job. The sales team was having all this data. They'd email it or Slack it over to our recruiting team, and then the recruiting team had to open up a job that they had to then work on. That seemed like an absolute waste of a process. So what we were able to do is actually build an automation using Salesforce's Flow engine that used to take the data that we needed from that opportunity, map it over into a new job, and create that automatically. And it just completely wiped out that meeting. It was no longer needed. The recruiting team would just have these new jobs pop up with all the data that they needed. And it's because we were using a Salesforce-based applicant tracking system. Ours specifically was Asymbl, asymbl.com, and that allowed us to eliminate that meeting. The next experiment that we ran, which just illuminated a huge miss in our process, was we used to have our recruiters who were spending their time between the ATS, their spreadsheets, their email, on LinkedIn, in Slack, texting candidates. We took a challenge for one specific day and we said, hey, look at how many times you have to copy paste just today and record what you had to copy and paste where. So this might be copying this email address from over here, pasting it over here so I can send them an email. Taking this piece of data from LinkedIn, pasting it over here in our ATS. Taking this text message, copying it from this thing, pasting it into this system. So just pay attention to that for a day. And what it illuminated to us was the incredible amount of various pieces of data sources that we had and how difficult it was to combine into one specific source. So do that for a day with your recruiting company and see how many different pieces of data you're tracking in all these different sources and how difficult it is to get into your system. And then once you figure that out, start looking into MuleSoft from Salesforce and Data Cloud. Both of those allow you to start combining different data sources. They both have their own use cases. Check this channel for more on those use cases. But make sure that you have all of that data flowing into a singular system, because that type of data into a very rich environment like Salesforce not only allows your individuals to do their work faster, but it's also going to empower interactional data into the future, which is going to be the value of your firm. Look up interactional data on this channel. So do a copy-paste challenge for just a day and have people start realizing how many different pieces of data are spread across different systems. Another experiment I ran with just the leaders of my recruiting team is I had them keep track of the questions they had to ask their teams during the day. So what data didn't they have that they had to go ask their teams for? What activity metrics were they curious about that they couldn't get from their teams? What sort of updates were they getting from their team members that their team members had to physically provide them or talk to them or have a meeting about, rather than this recruiting leader or the sales leader looking into a system and having all that data at their fingertips? So we did that for just a single day. And what it unveiled to us was, oh my gosh, there's so many different reports that we don't have the ability to track right now that we should be tracking or that we don't have built. And we were easily able to use the Salesforce reporting engine to build those reports for us throughout, like, I think maybe it took us a couple hours, and it saved us days worth of work because now all these recruiting leaders and these sales leaders had the exact data that they needed rather than having to have a meeting or check in with their teams. And it was the Salesforce reporting engine that allowed us to do that. I think there was one challenge that I did that had everyone rethink how we were managing all of our data inside of Salesforce, and I called it the database challenge. So for a single week, I said, all of my sources and recruiters, you cannot search another database of candidates before you search our internal database inside of Salesforce. And what that did is illuminate how poorly we were tracking data inside of our ATS and how much of that data we were actually using, because I noticed a trend in all of our recruiters that when they got a brand new job to work on, they immediately turned to something like LinkedIn to try and find the candidate that they needed. Rather than our database of hundreds of thousands and millions of candidates, why would they turn to LinkedIn first? So what it highlighted is that the data that we were tracking inside of our database wasn't actually the data that these recruiters need to be able to source those candidates. So we completely changed how we set up candidate profiles and the types of data that we were trying to surface from these searches, so that now we took advantage of all the data. We already had all these candidates inside of our Salesforce applicant tracking system that we can now take advantage of. I think that was probably the one experiment that led to the most changes for us, because we started asking our recruiters, why? Why are you not looking in our ATS first? Why are you going to these external sources? And they used to say things like, well, it's not up to date, or, well, it's not easy to search, or, well, we're not tracking this kind of data or this certification. So we changed completely how we were tracking our candidate database and the types of things we thought were important because of this one challenge that we did for a week. If I think back, there was probably one experiment that really changed my thought process on what we were tracking in our database and why. And I'll walk you through that experiment. So what I did is I pulled a report of the last 50 placements we ever had. And I took some time and I recreated those jobs in our system just as dummy records. I just recreated the job with all the same amount of data. And then I looked at what our ATS system had proposed as the best matching candidate for that. And I looked at that matching score. And then what I did is I specifically ran a search for the person that ended up getting that job, and I looked to see what their match score was for the job that they ended up actually accepting. And then I got such a ridiculous result that I doubled the amount of data that I was looking at. So I looked at 100 past jobs. And what I found was, and this completely blew my mind, is that for every candidate that actually ended up getting placed in a job, if I averaged that candidate's match score for the actual job they ended up getting, on average, they had a 15% match score to that job. That tells me that our system, based on what we were using to identify the best possible talent for a job, wouldn't have provided that candidate as a good fit 85% of the time. That tells me that we are serving up the absolute wrong matches for the jobs because of who actually ended up getting the job. We looked at the actual data. So that showed us that this kind of search engine, the key terms that we're looking for, all of that stuff didn't matter for who actually ended up getting the job. So it completely changed our mind for what are we looking at as a high quality candidate? What would actually show up in our system to tell us that is a good quality candidate? And we completely changed how we were searching for things. So I will give that challenge to you. Go back and look at your last, just start with 10, look at your last 10 placements. Look back and try and recreate that job in your system, try and search for that candidate and see what that candidate's match score would actually be for your job. That should tell you if you're searching for the right things in your system and if you're tracking for the right data and if your matching engine's actually working for you to help you make placements, or if it's just providing a whole bunch of junk up front, which that's what we found ours was doing. It was wasting a ton of time. So I'll put that challenge out to you. Try and go back to your last placements and look at what your average candidate placement match score was. So my hope is that with running those 5 experiments, you'll start recognizing some of the gaps in your ATS and hopefully be able to have the tools necessary to start implementing changes to remove those barriers in your business. Now, what I found is because I was using Salesforce in my recruiting firm, I was able to make those changes. So that's what I'd probably suggest to you all. If you're not using Salesforce already, make that switch so that you can start improving all these different business processes in your recruiting ops, because this is what's going to start making the difference and saving your recruiters tons of time and saving your business money. If you're looking for an ATS that works on Salesforce that allows you to do all these types of things, look at the Asymbl applicant tracking system. It's asymbl.com. That's what I ended up gravitating towards and why I actually work here now. So I would absolutely suggest the Asymbl applicant tracking system and for you to run these 5 experiments to help you understand where your gaps are in your recruiting ops process. Until next time, I hope you like this kind of content. If you want more of this, you can go to salesforceforrecruiters.com. There's plenty more content out there for you. And I also want to thank you for getting this far in the video by offering up a little bit of my time. If you email hello@bradowens.com with your questions of how you could potentially utilize Salesforce for your business, I'll get back to you. I'll answer your question. If it's even got enough meat on the bone, I'll make a whole YouTube video out of it that you can then show everyone that you work with, hey, this is because of me. So send that in to hello@bradowens.com. I'm happy to answer questions here on the show or directly through email. And with that, I'll turn you loose until the next episode. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.